So I'll bring George Bryan up.
Good morning. I know the hour is early. We did change the schedule a bit to accommodate another sales event today, which is good news. I have a feeling that their attendance might be a little greater than what I see in the room right now. But I also wanted to acknowledge that the video has been playing through the weekend. And we're going to show the video again. It's not uncommon that some of our attendees haven't seen the video, or it will inspire some more questions. It's about a 30-minute video, and it's very interesting about the supply chain. I was sharing a quick story because the question came about, well, do you have handouts for the video? And I don't. I can likely get some of the screenshots, but this video, the details were actually shown at a recent leadership summit that we had for our leadership teams. And then the information was so valued that we thought it would be great that residents also had access to it. Hence, it's our quarterly town hall, the first topic. So supply chain, I'm going to have, before we get started, have Bill come up and pray for us and lead us at the pledge, and then we'll get started. At about 9:38-ish, we're going to switch over to a screen where Brian Roundsville, one of the participants, is going to be available for us to also respond to questions. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. George. How many know what George's relationship is to Indian River Estates? Okay. All right, then I'm not going to say anything then. I just want you to know, I have a real compliment for you this morning. You are the thinnest looking crowd I've had in here in a long time. All right, with that, Erilyn went, I better move on. Shall we pray together this morning? Father, we're grateful to be together for this crowd, Lord. It's a little small today, but they are here eager to learn some things. And Father, we have our cups turned upright so that we can just learn so much from these who will be presenting to us today. May you bless us in our time together. Thank you for George and Erilyn being here, and may you bless them with everything that they need to make the presentation. For it's in your name we pray. Amen. Would you stand with me, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would you greet someone that you don't even know this morning?
I'm going to go ahead and get our video started. I'm not sure about the everyone out there looks a little thinner and not back here part. And had nothing to do with the supply chain, right, Bill? Okay. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Grant, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for ACTS. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our March Resident Town Hall presentation, Supply Chain, What is Really Happening? This is our first Resident Town Hall meeting for 2022. As a reminder, ACTS hosts 4 Resident Town Hall meetings during the calendar year, where we present information that impacts all of our communities. 2 of our Resident Town Hall meetings are finance related, with one being a presentation of our annual report and the other being the board-approved budget for the following year. The 2 other town hall meetings are general topics of interest as expressed by you, our residents. During the pandemic, over the course of the past 2 years, we have all heard various news stories and references to the supply chain issues facing both our nation and the entire world. Many of you have inquired about the impact of these issues on ACTS and how we manage the supply chain issues. It is our pleasure to discuss that topic with you today. Joining me to present are Gary Ginter, Senior Vice President of Procurement and Contract Management, Brian Rounsaville, Corporate Director of Procurement, and Jeremy Neely, Senior Vice President of Community Operations. It is now my pleasure to have Gary Ginter begin our presentation. Supply Chain, what is really happening? Gary?
Thank you, Jonathan. As Jonathan mentioned, my name is Gary Ginter. I'm the Senior Vice President of Procurement and Contract Management. I am proud to say that I've been with ACTS for 32 of my 42 years working in the field of healthcare and supply chain management. Also with me today is Brian Rounsaville. Brian is our Corporate Director of Procurement, and he is celebrating his one-year anniversary with ACTS this month. Brian Rounsaville has significant experience as well. Brian has 7 years of healthcare supply chain experience from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and 20-plus years of procurement experience. Collectively, we have over 70 years of procurement experience. So let's begin with what exactly do we mean by the term supply chain? Oxford's definition of supply chain is the sequence of processes involved in the production and distribution of a commodity. The key words are production and distribution. You will hear throughout our presentation many references to these two words. Production can't and won't occur if the manufacturing plants aren't open. Products can't be distributed if there aren't means to deliver products, if there are not trained drivers or workers to unload, and more importantly, if shipping containers can't be unloaded here, they're sent back overseas to be returned. The translation for ACTS is significant. Approximately 70 to 80% of the items we purchase come directly from our key primary distributors or contractors working on our construction and expansion projects at our communities. Because of what we must buy, we don't have the ability to purchase directly from the manufacturers. Certain industries rely on a multitude of distributors. There are many examples of this with ACTS. For environmental services, we must buy paper towels and trash can liners through coarse paper distribution houses. For medical supplies, we must buy from proven medical distributors, especially since the personal protective equipment supplies outbreak. The same is true for culinary supplies and food products. We can't buy flatware and tableware directly from the manufacturers. Maintenance supplies fall into the same category. In each of these areas, it was necessary to rely on our strategic partnerships, which have been proven to be successful during the last 2 years. In cases where we can, we go directly to the manufacturers and buy direct, such as cabinets, appliances, and recently flooring. While this eliminates a third-party distributor, it still presents supply chain challenges. Brian will now walk us through his version of what is a supply chain.
Thank you, Gary. Before the COVID pandemic, not many people had even heard of the supply chain. Today, it's a household term regularly mentioned on the nightly news. The president even referenced it in his recent State of the Union address. Simply put, the supply chain is a network that links a company to its suppliers through the production and distribution of a product or service. Looking at this infographic, you can see the 5 main steps in the supply chain, moving from left to right. You may have heard the term upstream, which is moving to the left of the image or closer to the manufacturer, whereas downstream is moving to the right. So how does this affect ACTS, you may ask? Well, the supply chain affects virtually every part of ACTS, from our food suppliers to our lawn care service providers to even our insurance carriers. For example, as Gary pointed out, ACTS is most impacted by step number 4, distribution, because ACTS is ultimately the customer as seen in step number 5. Due to the recent focus on supply chain procurement and logistics, supply chain management is one of the fastest growing careers in the country. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the field of supply chain is expected to grow by 30% by the year 2030, much faster than the average for all occupations.
Before COVID, certain PPE needs were minimal for the senior living industry. According to the CDC, there are 15,600 nursing homes in our country. N95 masks were never used in a skilled care environment. Face shields and isolation gowns were purchased in very limited quantities. N95 masks were only used in acute care hospitals for surgery. Now you have the entire nursing home industry trying to secure these types of masks that must be approved by the CDC. The focus was on just-in-time delivery. It used to be that companies were able to calculate the delivery time for replenishment stock based upon logic. If it was 8 days to get the next delivery, you would order 7 days before your inventory would be depleted and your shipment would arrive on time as scheduled. It was a logistics mathematical equation. Lead time required minus your current days of inventory on hand allowed for you to receive your supply just in time. Because of the supply chain issues, we're just not able to count on guaranteed delivery times because of production uncertainty and distribution issues. In the last 20 to 30 years, supply chain has become global. We'll explain later how much comes from overseas on container ships. That was not the issue 20 or 30 years ago when most manufacturing was completed within the United States. Now we are ever so reliant upon manufacturing from overseas. There was also an abundant workforce. People expected to come to work. You did not have labor shortages. It was rare to see help wanted signs. Now it is commonplace to see them. Every industry has been challenged with labor shortages. We too have experienced shortages. Companies even started consolidating manufacturing. The number of products offered were reduced, and services were eliminated for self-service options. 5 years ago, you could not bag your own groceries. Today, you can check out without even talking to anyone. You also saw company mergers occurring, further reducing the availability of products.
As you may recall, supply chain disruptions have been ongoing problems since the onset of COVID back in 2020. With shortages becoming commonplace, prices have risen significantly, as have lead times for delivery on many supply items. Every part of the economy has been impacted in some way, including the senior living sector. When the pandemic hit in early 2020, there were widespread PPE shortages across the nation. Items primarily affected were procedural and N95 masks, disposable isolation gowns, thermometers, and hand sanitizer. To make matters worse, existing suppliers had to allocate products based on purchase history, which hurt senior living providers who did not have significant previous purchase requirements for PPE. Additionally, new suppliers from around the world were offering inferior products, and unfortunately, there were instances of price gouging and fraud. The problem became, who can you trust? The federal government also became a supplier with both good and bad results. Throughout the pandemic, PPE became a requirement and the central focus for most organizations, especially hospitals and senior living communities. Meanwhile, raw materials and labor shortages put a significant dent in manufacturing capacities, which has resulted in extensive back orders and delayed deliveries while driving up prices and reducing the quality that we see in the market today. Consequently, we are faced with a delicate balance between price and quality.
To make matters during the pandemic worse, the federal government stepped in and seized PPE and equipment for their distribution. In one particular instance, we, ACTS, had ordered COVID testing equipment from Quidel. The contract was signed, order placed, and we were expecting delivery. Just literally days before we were supposed to receive the testing equipment, we were notified by Quidel that the government had confiscated all testing equipment. We finally received half of our order 2 months later and the remainder of our order 4 months after the original due date. You can see from this picture the government stepped in and used military planes to transport PPE supplies from overseas. Their efforts were just a drop in the bucket as our national demand far exceeds the inventory available. The Project Airbridge shipped from March 29th through June 18th. This included nearly 1.5 million N95 masks, which equates to only 96 mask respirators for each nursing home, more than 2.5 million face shields, 937 million gloves, 113.4 million surgical masks, 50.9 million gowns, Wait until you see the numbers Axe purchased later in the presentation. Unfortunately, the impact of the pandemic continued as more of the world's governments had to respond to stop the loss of life. It was the great closing of America, of the world. In fact, by April 2020, half the world's population, 3.9 billion people in 90 countries, were asked or ordered to stay home. There are only 195 countries in the world. Remember those two words from earlier? Production and distribution. Nothing was being produced or shipped in 90 countries. You can't shut down the world's economy for several months without having a major impact on the supply chain. Also, consumers went into survival mode, and demand for critical supplies like toilet paper and paper towels skyrocketed. When available, people started overbuying medicine, paper products, and water, causing the disruption of the entire food supply chain. At the same time, the manufacturing plants could not keep up with the demand. Next came the Great Resignation of 2021, which saw a massive number of workers leaving their jobs in the summer and early fall. Every industry was affected. In fact, of the 68.9 million separations in 2021, 47.4 million jobs were left voluntarily. 70%. In November 2021, 4.5 million voluntarily resigned in 1 month. Another 3 million workers took early retirement. Next came new vaccination and testing requirements from the CDC. Within just 2 weeks after the emergency use authorization approval, the first Axe community residents and healthcare staff were vaccinated at multiple Axe clinics held at each of our communities. Members of the COVID-19 task force literally worked daily, and in some weeks met several times a day with our strategic pharmaceutical partner, Omnicare/CVS, to vaccinate residents and staff at all 26 communities in the 9 states we operate. Additionally, there were new requirements for testing of healthcare workers and residents based upon county transmission levels. The CDC mandated testing requirements, and while they have been modified, they remain in effect today. We have spoken about supply chain challenges by the senior living industry. At times, Axe's key suppliers were also challenged, and we needed to source PPE from other qualified distributors. We had to monitor our inventory closely. Our need for disposable gowns, all types of masks, N95s, KN95s, and procedural masks, hand sanitizer, and soap skyrocketed. The cost of these items went up beyond reason. If you could get them, you were going to pay dearly. Brian talked about price gouging, and it was real. A one-time use disposable gown that was once 25 cents went to $4 each. We had to sift through the barrage of new suppliers who were willing to give us what we needed, but only if we paid for them up front. They wouldn't even show us the product before ordering. We never did. We built a database of all offers coming in from a variety of sources. We strategically onboarded several new suppliers we still use to this day. This is one of the major benefits of an organization of our size and scope as it relates to our ability to properly research alternatives and not get caught in the moment. We had to make changes to our standards and adapt. We began buying reusable impervious gowns. We also bought for every community reusable meal containers when paper products were non-existent. These are only 2 examples of many that were implemented. We had to establish new screening protocols for access to our campuses by both staff and guests, resulting in the need to procure and implement technology to assist. We assigned PPE coordinators at each community and established semi-weekly, then weekly inventory supply meetings. Each community was responsible for communicating their needs and sharing inventories when necessary. Today, as a best practice, they still meet bi-weekly. In the initial stages of COVID, we met with our key suppliers semi-weekly to discuss availability of supplies, to learn about their rationing and their supply concerns. The partnership with our vendors was important. Supplemental purchases from both McKesson and Medline, as well as a few other suppliers, were vital to our success. With the emergency youth authorization release of antigen rapid COVID tests, we established testing inventory supply coordinators at each community. They still meet weekly. We have had to purchase rapid COVID test kits to supplement the government shipments. Information is shared about government shipments still being delivered. We continue to move test kits that are about to expire to sister communities in need. Each community has a lock and key inventory of PPE that is stored in case of a future outbreak. This inventory is in addition to our emergency regionalized PPE inventory. Throughout the last 2 years, we've negotiated multiple group buys to ensure that we had sufficient supplies of the necessary PPE and testing equipment. The quantities that you see are for the last 2 years of purchases: 2.3 million procedural masks, 267,900 KN95s, and 50,000 N95s. These are all in addition to what the government supplied us. We continue to maintain appropriate levels of inventory of supplies at all of our communities, and we are well prepared to meet the needs of future pandemics, whatever they may be. During the pandemic, we've had to source and secure laboratory testing services from 13 different PCR laboratories on the East Coast. We didn't start out needing 13 laboratories, but over time, these laboratories' turnaround times diminished, and we were forced to look elsewhere. One major national laboratory told us twice that we had to take our business elsewhere because they could not handle our volume.
Unfortunately, COVID is not going away quickly, and neither are the supply chain challenges. This fall, just when things started to look like they were returning to normal, new COVID variants emerged. The rise of these new variants quickly reminded us that we were not out of the woods yet. The pandemic continues to pose significant challenges for global supply chains. Multiple logistics issues continue to slow and temporarily stop the flow of raw materials, manufacturing, and finished goods, while also disrupting the economy. Most experts predict that the effects of COVID on the supply chain will be felt for many years to come. Everything was about supply chain shortages in 2021. COVID vaccine shortages at the start of the year were replaced by fears that we would struggle to buy turkeys and toys for the holidays, in addition to the many shortages created by the lack of computer chips that are used in electronics, cars, and appliances. These items were either stuck in a container in a port somewhere or not being produced at all due to manufacturing constraints. For most of the year, supermarket shelves, car showrooms, and even gas stations were emptier than usual. While some shortages have been resolved, others will linger well into 2022. In 2021, Axe experienced shortages in products such as cabinetry, appliances, and paint. Axe also felt the effects on the service side through landscape maintenance, food service, and environmental service labor shortages. Because of these labor shortages, we have had to be very diligent about monitoring the quality and workmanship that we receive from our many service providers. In addition to these COVID effects, the supply chain also faced some significant disruptions from other events over the past year. These disruptions remind us of how we are all connected and how an issue can impact the entire supply chain. In February 2021, a once-in-a-century winter storm hit Texas, which caused the shutdowns of major manufacturing plants in the South. The storm closed many refineries and downstream chemical processing plants. These facilities shut down in anticipation of the pending storm and deep freeze. When refineries are shut down, the byproducts of oil and gas production that are used for producing adhesives and pigments are not available. As a result, our paint contract with Sherwin-Williams was affected, as they could not obtain necessary paint pigments to keep up with demand across the country. Consequently, we had to pull paint from various other geographical locations and ship them to supply our communities on the East Coast. In March, you may remember, the Suez Canal was blocked for 6 days after the grounding of the Ever Given, one of the largest container ships in the world, due to high winds from a sandstorm. As one of the world's busiest trade routes, the Suez Canal obstruction had a significant negative impact on trade between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. For example, each day that the canal was blocked, over 350 ships were unable to pass through the canal, which prevented an estimated $9.6 billion worth of international trade per day. In July 2021, Union Pacific suspended container shipments from its West Coast seaports to one of the railroad's major hubs in Chicago for 7 days in an effort to improve congestion at the inland port terminal. The decision to halt service between the West Coast and Chicago came just as the supply chain was dealing with a significant amount of congestion at just about every port and node, which further delayed distribution routes across the country. In August, the frequent California wildfires cut off additional freight arteries from the west, creating choke points for inventory traveling throughout the country via truck and rail. As of December 16, 2021, for example, a total of over 8,600 fires were recorded, burning 2.5 million acres across California alone. In September 2021, in addition to the impact we saw at our Fort Washington community, Hurricane Ida had a significant impact on Louisiana refinery operations, the Gulf of Mexico production facilities, and throughout the East Coast. For example, more than 40% of the country's polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, capacity was knocked offline after Hurricane Ida swept through Louisiana. PVC is known most for its use in pipes, but the material is also found in window frames, vinyl siding, doors, electric cables, flooring, canvas, and bottles, all of which are used in products we use here at Axe. In November, just as things began to settle down and mask mandates were starting to be lifted, and a sense of life after COVID was beginning to emerge, the World Health Organization designated the Omicron variant as a new variant of concern. For most citizens, frustrations began to boil over, and the light at the end of the tunnel seemed to grow dimmer once again. In January 2022, up on our northern border, protesters blocked a U.S.-Canada border crossing over COVID mandates, causing a significant bottleneck within one of Canada's major logistics networks. These protests stemmed from truckers opposing Canada's new mandate requiring them to either be fully vaccinated when crossing the Canadian-U.S. border or face a mandatory 2-week quarantine. Most recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has rattled global supply chains that are still in disarray from the pandemic, adding to the surging costs, prolonged deliveries, and other logistical challenges for companies trying to move goods around the world. Russia's military action is severing key supply chains, setting off a scramble among global companies to comply with many new sanctions and restrictions.
These are all a good reminder of what impacts our supply chain. As you can see from this slide, every type of freight cost has increased significantly, and with the associated delays. The U.S. has a truck driver shortage of 80,000. Our ports are overwhelmed with the number of containers. If you laid all the containers end to end, it would take you from Los Angeles to Chicago. Please look in the lower right-hand column of this screen as it identifies 60% of the global goods moved by a shipping container. Every mode of transportation, sea, land, and air, has experienced bottlenecks and delays because of the labor and supply chain issues. As a result, deliveries are delayed, supplies are unavailable, and freight costs have increased significantly. With shipping bottlenecks and some critical supply shortages persisting, global price inflation continues to rise and will remain high in 2022. Consumer prices rose 7.5% in January 2022, the largest 12-month increase in 40 years, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on February 10, 2022. On top of that, we are seeing recent price increases range from 15 to 40% from key suppliers. We are now experiencing the worst inflation period in the last 40 years.
As we have discussed in this presentation, there are many unresolved supply chain issues that can have an effect on our communities here at Axe. We are continuing to see labor shortages from our service providers and more frequent and longer back orders for supplies. And even when we do get confirmation that our orders have been shipped, third-party delivery companies often do not arrive as scheduled, or sometimes damage our supplies in transit. We have also experienced issues with inferior quality and workmanship due to untrained temporary staff in manufacturing plants. Organizations struggle with achieving a balance between resiliency and competitiveness, as stock on hand in the form of reserves requires capital, which comes from price increases that are eventually passed along to the consumer. So as we navigate these uncharted waters, prices and freight costs continue to rise, and unfortunately, this is the new normal with today's supply chain. However, we are optimistic in the team we have in place and the relationships our communities have with each other and with our suppliers as we continue to work through these challenges in a mighty way. We have learned some valuable lessons over the past 2 years that will help guide us through the post-COVID era. First, by working as far upstream as possible, we continue to try to shorten the supply chain to minimize our risk as best we can. Second, we must continue to expand our strategic supplier relationships to identify partners who can help get us through supply challenges. For example, Omnicare, our pharmacy supplier, was instrumental in helping get us vaccines so quickly. McKesson and Medline were instrumental during the first phases of COVID in securing our large PPE orders. These strategic supplier relationships proved to be invaluable during the pandemic. Finally, over 20 years ago, ACTS established a series of value analysis committees to help develop and standardize our purchase requirements. We must continue to utilize the value analysis process to build resiliency into our supply chain through standardization and innovation whenever possible. On a personal note, I'm thrilled to be part of the ACTS team and look forward to continued quality improvement initiatives for managing our supply chain. It's now my pleasure to turn this back over to Gary for his final thoughts before Jeremy Neely joins us for closing remarks.
The pandemic has certainly challenged us in many ways. As we look forward, we know our focus will continue to be on the prolonged pandemic recovery. Rest assured, providing quality services to our residents is our highest priority, and we hope this presentation has given you added comfort that despite what is happening with regards to supply chain issues, ACTS is well prepared on meeting the needs of our residents. Our procurement policies require major supply and service contracts to be competitively bid on a multi-year basis. It is not uncommon for us to receive 4 or more responses to our request for quotations. This strategy creates competition, and it allows us to investigate and evaluate potential new partners. Also, we continue our long-standing practice of meeting with our contracted key distributors in each discipline for quarterly business reviews. The distinct purpose of these meetings is to review our previous purchase history, identifying new items and opportunities to reduce our operating expenses. This practice has been extremely valuable and has allowed us to modify our purchases and take advantage of price reductions and further savings opportunities. We thank you for your patience, understanding, and prayers as we continue to work through these challenging times. Thank you for being part of the ACTS family. May God bless you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jeremy Neely, Senior Vice President of Community Operations, for the final comments.
Thank you, Gary and Brian, for an informative presentation regarding the supply chain. I also want to personally thank both of you and your team for the countless hours of work dedicated to managing our supply chain issues during this unprecedented pandemic. We hope you enjoyed hearing this information. As is our practice, this presentation will be shared multiple times at your community on your in-house television channel. The presentation also has been posted on our resident portal. Your executive director will inform you of the schedule for playing this presentation at your community. In addition, your executive director, along with your regional vice president, will host a live community town hall Q&A to be scheduled within the next couple of weeks. Gary and Brian will join your meeting with the utilization of technology to answer any questions you may have. As is our best practice, we do ask you to email any questions to your executive director in advance of the live meeting so we can do appropriate research if needed. We thank you for watching this, our March Town Hall presentation, Supply Chain, What is Really Happening. And as Gary said, may God bless you and your families.
We're now going to switch over to another platform so that Brian can join us live. Brian, can you hear me okay?
Hey, George. I can hear you.
Fantastic. And you should have a view of our audience here. And if you'll
Yep.
turn the lights on in the room, in the back of the room. So we do have a number of, actually, before we start, what an outstanding presentation. That's one of the residents that have joined us today remarked that this information would be valued for those outside of ACTS as well. Just a lot of details about the impacts that the supply chain has had on us, from the dealing with the different waves of COVID that we've had over the past couple of years. We do have several questions that were submitted in advance, and actually one was in advance of even the video playing. And I'll just make the general remark, and it was just a recommendation, if you will, regarding resident involvement, that a lot of residents have a lot of background and a lot of experiences in business, different areas of business, et cetera. And why does not ACTS reach out to the residents to get that feedback and their expertise in guiding us? And actually, we do that in a format through the Residents Association and involvement, and do include resident leadership directly with decision-making and processes on several touch points through the year and regularly through the executive director. That being said, if someone has background that they would like to share, that's the path that I would recommend. We don't have a formal query looking for experts in different fields, but we do have open ears and respect and understand that a lot of our residents do have experience. So a couple of questions were submitted following the presentation, watching it at home. And this one actually, I think, may be an underlying concern that many residents have. And it says, in view of the ongoing problems with the supply chain, inflation rates exceeding the increase in monthly maintenance fees, what budgetary changes can we expect over or at the local level? And actually, ACTS budgeted to understand or forecast a lot of the issues that we have now. I would say one of our biggest challenges that remains is the labor market as well. So outside of supply chain, supply and demand, you heard one of the last comments Gary made about our vendors is that we have multi-year contracts. That does help us, and Brian might want to comment on those specifically with regards to food, for example. But other areas are more challenging, such as our apartment renovation and restoration. So the cost of supplies is increasing. But we also can look at what's included or the details or finishes that are included. But if you look at also over the last, especially residents that have been here for 8 or 9 years, we have gone through a process within our apartment renovations to what we called Act 2, so a complete gut of an apartment and bringing the entire apartment up to current standards, hurricane windows, for example, electrical, even some of the layout and design. Many of our, if not most of our apartments have gone through that process. So the renovation dollars will start to relax and recede from what we have experienced for the prior years. So that's one of the governing factors that helps. But generally, when we have to pump the brakes from an expense perspective, capital dollars are one of the areas that we look at. And many long-term residents will know in the past if we've had major concerns that impact the bottom line, then that's one of the opportunities we have. We take pride as a not-for-profit in reinvesting in our buildings and keeping everything up to the highest standards. And it's been a few years since I've gotten this statistic, but generally speaking, the average age of an ACTS community is around 7 years. That's in reinvestment and bringing the infrastructure, keeping the infrastructure high. Now, ACTS, as a not-for-profit, we run on a tight margin as well. So roughly 3% margin. So for every dollar that we bring in, we have roughly 3 cents left. And that's because we don't have corporate jets. We don't have dividends paying out. We reinvest into the properties, and that's one of the brings the high value for ACTS. So we do have a lot of means and methods in keeping monthly maintenance fees in check. Executive directors and all the department heads also have a dashboard that is very current that shows their revenues and expenses and what the bottom line is at the community. It tells us when there are red flags that we need to watch for. I think, from my experience with ACTS, we have a good handle on controlling our expenses and monitoring our revenues and the incoming revenues to be able to keep everything in check. I don't foresee that we're going to have any changes this fiscal year, especially at the local level. If anything, you're going to see us working behind the scenes on what we can do to mediate or to work through local issues with local contractors. Brian, I don't know if you want to fill in. I know that food supply contracts and inflation are one of the conversations that we've been having. So I don't know if there's anything additional you'd like to share with that.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity. Don't often get a chance to, never been videoed before, so hopefully it didn't look too bad on the screen there. But the food, the culinary and the pharmacy contracts, the way they're structured, they're cost plus agreements and they're multiple years. So we've negotiated a very low markup and it's, cost plus on that, on the food. In fact, Gary's doing a site visit as we speak for the New Jersey community and the PA communities, evaluating a food supplier that's out to bid right now. We have seen some of our landscape maintenance contracts, they're hitting us with some fuel surcharges, and we try to negotiate those as low as possible and lock in our pricing. Our contracts are generally, like Gary said in the video, we do 2 to 3 year deals. We try to hold our prices firm for that period of time. And we've had a really crazy 2 years here. In addition to COVID, we've had all kinds of things in the market that have been abnormal occurrences. So, we've been able to weather the storm, knock on wood, pretty well. But, we're continually working to negotiate our rates down and develop relationships with our suppliers that'll help carry us through these tough times. And in one sense, we want to keep our prices down. In another sense, but at what expense do we want to sacrifice quality or service? That's really been the tough thing, particularly with labor. We've seen with our cabinet manufacturers on the new construction, they've had tough time staffing the factories, and we've had occasions where we've gotten deliveries of cabinetry, and the items are not assembled correctly because they're just put in a box and not glued, and that speaks to the untrained labor that they have in the factories because they're scrambling. We've also seen instances where we work really hard to get a delivery of a product and it gets beat up or lost or doesn't show up because they defer to a third-party delivery company, and it just never makes its way here, or it gets here and it's damaged beyond use. So lots of things that we're dealing with, but we work really hard to do multiple year deals to hold our prices as low as possible and develop long-term relationships with our suppliers.
Thank you, Brian.
So,
Yeah, we have another question that might be answered locally, and you might have insight, Brian, but I've asked Jeff Tyler to respond. And there are several parts to this resident submission. The first one says, what foods are in short supply? And it's qualified by asking, are oatmeal raisins in short supply? Seems that not having oatmeal raisin cookies in a long time. So that may be very local, so I asked Jeff to respond to what is in short supply and respond to our oatmeal raisin cookie situation.
Well, generally speaking, there are just shortages across, as we know. Even coming up this week on our menu, this Thursday, we are actually having a tough time, getting enough lamb shanks in. Bratwurst. I mean, this is some of the struggles we're going throughout. But we fight through it. Folks behind the scenes do a great job in working so we can get products in here. But again, it's a tough thing. Oatmeal raisin cookies, we can certainly keep trying to order them, and hopefully they come in from our major food supplier. There's lots of things like that we get partial orders in. But again, we fight through it, and we try to get them there for you. As it was mentioned, Gary's out looking at other, like contract bids. And I'm aware that I used to go on some trips with Gary Ginter. And now Tim Bear, who's my colleague next door at West, is actually doing some of those trips with them. And we go to these plants and we see what they have and we see what they're made of and their workers, cleanliness, and everything that goes in it. We do try to, still provide the best for you. We don't want to dip in quality. So, I've been asked a question, how do we, I have a budget. Everybody knows I have a working budget, but how do we maintain the budget when these rising food costs are going up? And my answer is I don't want to sacrifice quality. We're going to control what we can right here. And things like, waste, make sure we get the most out of product, make sure folks are not over hoarding in the bistro or brown bags, things like that. We do our best to maintain all types of quality control right here and waste control. I hope that helped.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. New term, over-hoarding. A certain amount of hoarding is acceptable, but over-hoarding is out of the question.
Thanks, George, that helps.
My pleasure. There's another part to this, and it's referring to labor, and it says restaurants seem to be back in full. What are we offering employees that acts is, what are they offering employees that acts is not? Hence, short staff. First, a reality check. Yesterday, I went to a local sub shop up in the plaza here, Firehouse Subs, and I shouldn't probably say their name, but save you a trip on Monday, they're closed. There's a sign in the door saying they're short on labor, they're closed on Mondays. It's not over. It's highly competitive and very costly. So it's also, we're also very cued in on quality. So don't just jump at first applicants or we need a warm body. We need quality and commitment. ACTS is really committed to long-term employee relationships. Pre-pandemic, our turnover rate in all but a couple of our newest affiliate communities was under 15%. Here at Indian River Estates, typically around 10%, very, very low in a marketplace where pre-pandemic rates, 40% is considered a good place to be for turnover. Some of our communities are in the 5% range, pre-pandemic. We focus on that. So we don't only look to fill positions and get servers or cooks, but we're looking for the right fit at the same time. And we do have sign-on bonuses. We have a number of individuals within our Human Resources Department that focus on this. This is what they do. I spend a good part of my week on and off calls talking about getting the right number. Increases, we've had compression increases, so while we're bringing on employees at higher rates, we also have to respect our long-term employees at the same position, so you have compression, so they need to have an increase. This year, we budgeted for this event, so hence your monthly maintenance fee increase was high for coming into this year, higher than past years. But it's because we saw the storm and we're addressing it. It's still a challenge. We're getting better. I think we're in a much better place, and you can tell by the opening of the dining room, for standard services on more frequency. But we also locally, I know that, are they aware of your? Yeah. So Chef Reed resigned his position. Now it was the Great Resignation. You heard that on the presentation today. A lot of professionals across the nation are reevaluating who they are, and they're changing careers. As Reed is motto, he's not going to be a chef elsewhere, which a chef works every holiday, or works most holidays, nights and weekends. So he has a young family. He's looking for a quality of life. We deal with that within our communities. We often look for opportunities for employees to change roles. So if you want, and we really pushed this in our recent employee summit. We have employee town halls as well. I, with the regional director of human resources, talked to employees about options, opportunities, education. What would you like to do? Because many individuals, we're just foreseeing that they may want a career path change within ACTS. We have so many different areas. So we look at that, but it's restaurants, some might be in full swing, many are not. And those that may be are still experiencing very high turnover, which is extremely costly. So again, we're looking to find the right fit for the culture of the organization and the community for long-term relationship with employees. And I know that it's a focal point. There's a daily meeting here that is chaired by your business office, and each of the department heads that have that are in need of employees are able to have a quick conversation on where we are with the process. Who do you have in the pipeline? Do we need to look at the ad? Does it need to be modified? Do we need a sign-on bonus? Do we already have one? All these factors are reviewed. I participate in a lot of these as well, just brainstorming when we have a position for a long period of time. I'm just highlighting, it is a focal point, and there's no benefit for any of us not to be fully staffed. And it's costly to not be fully staffed. It costs more. And onboarding and these sign-on bonuses, that's why we just can't throw money at the problem. We need to throw a solution, long-term solution at the problem. Last is just a comment on the reservation system and how will it aid with the pre-COVID dining system. Let me read it. What will have a reservation system do? Okay, what will having a reservation system do that we had with the pre-COVID system? I think what it is a uniquely worded comment about why are we doing reservations when we didn't have them before. There are different pressures here. There's also the cook to order, like restaurant-style dining. And I know you don't want to hear that when you can't get a seat at the table. But the reality is right now, we don't want to sit someone at a table who's not going to be waited on for enough of a time period that they're not going to have an enjoyable dining experience. It varies by community. When staffing is in order, the reservations will be highly recommended, but not absolute. So just like now, if you go to a restaurant and you want to guarantee a seat, you get reservations. If you want to have a casual evening and maybe dine with another couple, then you don't have the reservations, but you're okay to sit down and wait until a table's open. We will get there. We will get there, but it's going to require us to be staffed in order to do that. Until then, the reservations are just a way to make sure we can serve all of those individuals that are coming to the dining room. I do encourage, and I know you do this community has the advantage of having multiple dining venues. I would leverage those for your dining experience. Not all communities have that as an option. And it's funny how, you sometimes when you have something, you don't appreciate the value because it's just there every day. But there are some communities that literally have one dining venue. I have 2 within the Southeast region that have one dining venue or takeout, and that's it. And so you have 4, and hopefully varying menus. I know sometimes I've heard you say varying qualities, but well, they need to compete between each other, and that's part of the beauty of having the 4 venues on site. Those were the submitted questions. If there are other questions, we do have a microphone, and in order for Brian to hear you, we're going to need to use the microphone. So we'll open up for other questions in the room as well.
We were told that it was more expensive to have individual salads than to have a salad bar. Why don't you save money and have the salad bar, which we all liked?
Yes, salad bars. Salad bars across the country closed down, because of the infection spread. We are investigating methods, and we see some restaurants are opening salad bars where you wear mittens, for example. Just last week, we were in a conversation about that. And some communities have large salad bars that are not up and functioning in their main dining room. Salad bars, may become an option where we still serve for you, point and click, kind of. I'll have some of that, but that takes labor, But it's really a cross-contamination control factor, and it's not just Axe, it's industry-wide. But we are looking at methods and means of being able to go back to salad bars. Another question?
Do you have one more?
Just a follow-up. Was it dangerous to have a salad bar before COVID?
Likely, but that was before COVID, and so, COVID clearly, it's killing people today. And now there's more immunity to it, and it's going to become just another flu one day perhaps, but But no, it was a factor, it was a controllable area that we took control of, not just us. And there may have been other factors, restaurants closing down, not just Axe. You know, there's clearly a cross-contamination potential, clearly a cross-contamination potential. Many people never eat at restaurants that have salad bars, you know, with the sneeze guards, and just sit there for an hour and watch them and see if you do it twice, you know. So we're just very sensitive to it, and it's clearly an area that we can control. But if we can return to using them, I know it's a satisfaction area for residents, and we have some nice salad bars. Yes, sir.
I lived here briefly before COVID came along. Since COVID, the regulations have become, in my opinion, become unbearable, have removed all signs of companionship, meeting new residents and things like that. Keep the unintended consequences of the regulation is to remove all the friendship that was available prior to COVID. When will we get back to the way it used to be?
For all intents and purposes, we're back now. The only variable is we have reservations and dining. There's no, in fact, I saw, and this should be, there's a sign at West at the cart or the puzzle table that says puzzle shouldn't be done. That should be taken off. We're back, you know, where you can have events. I would still be careful, and now our hand washing has probably never been better. But outside of the reservation program, which should correct itself with labor and technology, that there's no reason you can't have a social lifestyle now.
How are you notified of new CDC regulations?
How are we notified? We monitor for the changes. So we have individuals within Axe that, especially with the volume of changes, notifications come out like instant mailings, and a lot of us receive those. We have some employees who just focus on that. And when they do change, CDC are guidelines, you know, so they're minimum standards, if you will. But we do monitor those very closely. With employees, it's also OSHA. So when you get those calls, and that's one of the regulations, is to notify you of exposure potential. So there's a weekly letter that's generalized, and then a daily call within 24 hours of a positive case. Those are actually CDC or CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and also OSHA, so employees know. Residential residents in independent living areas technically probably don't require the CMS call. Overall, we've done it for the entire pandemic, and we know that many residents, including the boards on your associations, have asked to be included, so that there's no mystery of what's going on behind the scenes. So, in other words, you'd rather know if we have any impact or infections on campus than not. I think those are diminishing now, and that's very favorable. I heard statewide it's around 3%, and it was 30% 3 weeks ago. So Omicron has really dipped off quickly, but we still have to be vigilant. You still will get if you don't have any infected cases, you'll still get the weekly letter or call just giving you that statement, that fact, and that's a CMS requirement.
Good morning. Talking about costs on the local level, you have increased the costs of bus trips this year, fully understandable with the rising cost of gas. Are there any plans to change the costs of food outside the one meal a day? In other words, if raising the costs if you choose to have an extra meal in the bistro, have visitors who might have steak as opposed to, say, spaghetti and meatballs in the dining room? And thirdly, COVID, are the anti-COVID pills available here through the health office, or if you test positive, are you on your own? And fourthly, to save you having to walk into everybody's offices if you have comments or notice things that are not working, could there not be some boxes that you can put in that you noticed this fountain wasn't working or these bricks by the pool are uneven, so that it takes less time for, say, Jeff to just flip through them and say, oh, I know that, I know that, I know that, as opposed to having to disturb him in his office? Thank you.
I feel like this is the Mentimental exam to see if I remember all the questions or not. So I'm going to go backwards. I know at West there's a suggestion box. That's an example of, and there used to be one here many moons ago, but a suggestion box, isn't as quickly as getting a message through Alexis at the desk, but that can be looked at so that there's a way to drop an idea or a question in the box. Or a repair. Well, my concern would be that it would sit, for a period of time. Whereas a repair, if you go to the desk, Alexis can put it in quickly. But that's something that Erilyn can look at. It certainly can be done. I know that the suggestion box can work, but as a past executive director, I have to tell you, there were times I peeked in there and was like, oh, I forgot the box. And then I had to, empty read the box. So it goes several days sometimes without being seen. As with regards to the pills for COVID, that's through your physician. We do have vaccinations and a vaccination process available, but those if you have concern or if you're ill, you would work through your physician. Now, you could work through the nurse practitioner here, Lisi, and she might be able to help facilitate, but it's not a knock on the door and it would be there. It would be a prescription that she would need to write. And then the first one, you talked about fuel and the increase in the trips was probably, if the increase went through in November, it was probably not foreseeing the increase with the fuel that we're paying now. So you heard about fuel surcharges that they're tacking on delivery supplies to accommodate the difference. So that may be something, depending on where fuel ends up, at the end of the year and what the forecast is, that they may have to address. But I'm missing one. A la carte food. See, I failed the test. What is 75%? I don't think I got in. Yes, we are looking at the food cost and actually the food quality, like the cook to order. We need to, many of our guest meal charges don't even cover the food cost, let alone the labor. So we are looking at that specifically. And it gets more complex, there are more opportunities. I know that there will be more information in the presentation that Jeff and the culinary team are working on. It was actually delayed for different reasons. It was gonna be originally in April. So I don't know the exact date, but we're gonna be discussing that. So it's in essence to make sure that we're charging a fair price, but not giving services away, which go at the expense of all residents. Okay. Oh, we have one more response to a question.
Hello. There was an additional question, not associated with the supply chain, but it was in reference to the door handles being changed in a building the other day. 2 days before the door handles were changed, Mike Bouchon, he did put out a code red, a reverse 911, to let those residents know that the door handles would be changed. Maybe about 7 or 8 months ago, Jeff came to the resident association meeting and had a show and tell of the locks that would be going onto the storage rooms in addition to the residents' apartments. 2 reasons for changing those locks. One reason was they were ADA compliant. The other reason was, Jeff, can you hold your keys up so that they can see your keychain? Jeff has a massive keychain, along with other maintenance people. They have the same keychain, which is most ridiculous. So now we will have the ability to just change the cylinder and make the keys here on site. So that was the reason for the change. Yes, sir.
With reference to the key lock, we kept experiencing mysterious happenings of our door locking accidentally when we closed the door thinking it was unlocked, and even having tested it was unlocked. We later discovered that it's going to sound silly, but the door stop on the wall was only like this long.
Mm-hmm.
And when the door opened, it went against the wall and locked
Yeah.
unknowingly to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Now, I'm only just to make everyone aware of it, the issue was repaired by Jeff and his staff by putting in a longer doorstop, and now the door doesn't magically lock itself. But I just wanted to make sure
Everyone knew, yeah. And if you're experiencing that problem, then just let Alexis know, and then Jeff or one of the team members will be able to correct it for you.
Just in case, is this being recorded as well? In case you couldn't hear the problem, with the new locks, if some of the door stops are shorter, so if the door swings open, it can press the lock from the inside unknowingly, so you could get locked out. So if you have a new door handle, you might want to check to see if the door stops it before the lock presses against the wall. Just want to make sure our viewers at home don't spill their bowl of cereal when they get that message and check the door. Well, I want to thank Brian for participating today. Outstanding job, Brian. It was a fantastic video. We recommend that you go mainstream with it.
I don't know, my broadcast days may be short-lived, so.
No, very
Thank you
well
for the
done.
opportunity.
Very informative, very well done. Question for you, are there any slides or some of the statistics were very interesting, but there was a lot of data on one page. Do we have access to some slides that by request residents could have? Can you look into
Sure.
that for us?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I can share them with you, George, if you want to
Perfect.
distribute.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. And I want to
You're
thank
welcome.
everyone also for participating today. We actually do have a good crowd. You know, it varies by topic and by community. Some communities really rely heavily on being able to stay home and watch at home, and others fill the house. I think this is a good crowd. We have a great topic, and I do want to thank you for coming out and joining us today. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Brian.